Thank you very much. I'm going to ask Ida, first of all, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself and saying a few words about Afterlives and your translation of it.
Sorry, I was trying to unmute. Okay, yeah, hi. Hi, yeah, so I'm Ida Hadjivayanis. It's lovely to meet all of you here. There's so many of you. I mean, I'm sure if I do, then I can see all of your names. So I'm senior lecturer in Swahili studies at SOAS, University of London. And I am a huge fan of Abdulrazak Gurna. That's the last year's Nobel laureate. And I think you have all read his novel Afterlives, or have tried to. Well, I hope you have. And I'll just quickly say that I'm now translating one of his works, which is Paradise. And Afterlives actually takes place after Paradise. So it's the afterlife of the main character in Paradise, Hamza, who is Yusuf in Paradise. But this is very much as in like a novel that is set in East Africa, sort of like German East Africa, and there's so many characters. You've got Hamza, you've got Khalifa, Ilyas, but somehow they're all interlinked in one way or another through sort of like religion, culture, the East African way of life. We'll talk about this as we go on, because I've got, I think, 2 minutes to introduce myself, but otherwise that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ida. Emmanuel, let me invite you next, if you would, to introduce yourself in 2 minutes and say a few words about your essay in Tomorrow is Too Late. Emmanuel is joining us from Burundi, so it's possible there's a few technical issues. Emmanuel, are you able to hear us? There we are.
Okay, yeah. Do you hear me well?
We hear you clearly, thank you.
Okay, good. So I'm Emmanuel Niyoyabikoze. I'm from Burundi. I'm the founder of a no-profit organization working for environment protection. I started greening Burundi after confronted some climate issues happening there in Burundi, and I've been motivated and convinced to make a change as a productive and seek sustainable solutions. So Burundi is suffering from desertification, deforestation, drought, floods, and other negative impacts happening there in Burundi. So as a productive view, I tried to make a change in my community and seek sustainable solutions, climate actions there in Burundi.
Thank you so much, Emmanuel. And finally, Paula, let's ask you to introduce yourself and say a few words about Phoebe.
Hi, I'm Paula Gooder. I'm the Canon Chancellor of St. Paul's Cathedral, but a New Testament scholar. And my book, Phoebe, I was trying to do something different with a piece of Pauline theology. So often when, well, as a female Pauline scholar, people say to me, surely you know that Paul isn't very positive about women. And what I was trying to do was actually to put the other case, to say that actually Paul is remarkably positive about women, because actually the women who were leaders in the Pauline community are very clearly supported, both by Paul and by the other members of the community. So I was trying to do was to imagine what it might have been like to have been somebody who lived in the 1st century, somebody who knew Paul, somebody who began to spread the gospel, spread the good news of Jesus Christ. And so it's not a novel. It's more of a historical imagination. So imagining into a historical situation, but with footnotes, because I'm an academic and I can't help myself. And the footnotes are to explain what we know and what we don't know. But that's a kind of a brief précis. And if I'm allowed to say so, last week I brought out another book like Phoebe, which is called Lydia, on a very similar basis, but based on Lydia, who's the dealer in purple from Acts 16.
Thank you, Paula. And I know you have to slip away a little bit early, so we're going to start with you. May I ask you, first of all, what inspired you to write Phoebe?
It was because I had many conversations with people who would kind of, when the conversation would go something along the lines of, what do you study in the New Testament? And I would say, I study Paul. And then that kind of look of slight depression would pass people's faces, because a lot of people find Paul quite difficult to read, and they certainly find Pauline scholarship very difficult to read. So what I was trying to do was to present some Pauline scholarship in a way that was attractively packaged to get people to think a little bit more about it. So I was trying to excite people about Pauline scholarship without presenting them with a massive tome of very erudite writings.
Which we're all very grateful for. When I was reading Phoebe, I absolutely loved the bit where she realizes she has control over her own story. That's what she says. She realizes she has control over her own story. And that reminded me of so many of the women in 5 Talents partner programs. When we ask them what's changed for them, they often start their sentence with, now I can start my own business, now I can vote, now I can pay for my children's basic needs, which is indeed the discovery of their own agency. So why do you think we don't hear more female voices or from more women with agency in the Bible?
Largely because of when it was written and by whom it was written. It was written at a time when women were very, had lots of agency within the home, but not very much agency outside of the home. And as a result, it meant that those who crafted the narrative about the early church told the narrative of the people that they saw day in, day out. The people they saw day in, day out were those in the public sphere, not those in the private sphere. So I think there's something quite kind of striking about the New Testament, therefore. And the thing that I always want to say is, given the background, given the historical kind of situation in which in the Bible, Old and New Testament is located, it's amazing how many stories of women we do have. So in a way, I want to cast it in a different way, not to say how few voices there are of women, but actually, if you read really carefully, there's loads of women all over the place in the Bible. And actually, that's much more surprising than the other way around, given the context.
Perhaps it's more that we need to be paying more attention to them and listening more to their voices as we.
Well, and I think for me, one of the things that came out of writing Phoebe is listening really carefully to an ancient voice, and what an ancient voice might have said, makes me realize how important it is to listen to the voices that you don't easily hear. So in the biblical narrative, there are voices that are really easy to hear because they're speaking all the time, and then more hidden voices. And it alerted me to the fact that actually we need, as Christians, to be much better to listen to all of those voices that don't naturally have a lot of volume in the context in which we worship and learn.
I found that in Phoebe as well. So I'm thinking of Felix when he tells his story of the 5,000. Everybody loves the character of Felix, and he has such an attentive audience. And then the whole book is about Phoebe telling her story in many ways, and the very fact that she's able to share her traumatic experiences, her physical and sexual and emotional abuse, the loss of her child, the fact that she's able to share those stories helps her own healing process. And yet we get the sense that perhaps Paul is a little bit remote and he's not so interested in stories, but more interested in ideas. And what we know from 5 Talents is that when communities come together and start to trust one another with their money in their savings groups, they do also trust each other with their stories, with their problems. That for them is also part of the healing and the rebuilding process. And what seems to be important is that there is somebody there to listen to you. So how do you reflect on that, with perhaps this sense that Paul wasn't so interested in stories and perhaps wasn't so interested in listening?
Well, what I was trying to do in depicting, so one of the really important things in Phoebe is Paul never appears. He's just a shadow in the background. And the reason why I had him as a shadow in the background is because the thing that I'm really struck by when I talk to people about Paul is absolutely everyone's got an opinion about him. They might love him, they might hate him, they might be indifferent to him, but the Paul that you encounter through the people you talk to is a kind of complete range of different Pauls. So you have some people who totally understand who he was, and some people who are kind of really struggle. And the thing that I was really struck by when I was thinking about the earliest church is that that was probably true then. And you can tell it if you read really carefully in the letters. So there are some people, if we take someone, say somebody like Timothy, who clearly absolutely understood Paul, was very fond of him, knew how his mind worked and related really well to him. And then there were other people, like, for example, the Corinthian community, who really reacted very badly to Paul. And you had that whole breakdown of relationship between Paul and the community. And what I was trying to illustrate was not actually that Paul wasn't interested so much in stories, although I do think Paul is a very task-focused person. You can tell that through Acts and his letters. What I was trying to do is to say the Paul that we meet today is mediated by 1,000 different voices. You've got what Luke says about him, you've got the different responses that Paul has to his communities in his letters, and then you've got thousands of years of Christian history of different people understanding Paul in different ways. So I was just trying to say, actually, there's lots of Pauls, and the lots of Pauls are of the different people who talk about him and have different emphases, some who like him, some who don't like him, some who are annoyed by him, some who think he's absolutely fabulous. So in a way, I was trying not to say that Paul didn't like stories, but that actually how you understand who Paul is comes through many, many different voices. Some who feel more warm to him than others. And I think that's true of all the Bible that we read. You can people relate in different ways, but particularly true of Paul.
Well, I'm sure Ida, as a translator, will have some interesting perspectives on mediating different voices, and we might come to that shortly. But first of all, Ida, I want to begin by asking you about a line that really jumped out for me at Afterlives. We've spoken about women having a voice but maybe not being listened to, and the fact that we all need to listen more carefully. But in Afterlives, the African and Indian soldiers who are conscripted to fight in the war are not even seen, let alone heard. And there's a line that is repeated a couple of times that nobody even bothers to count their bodies when they're killed in the war. There's no war memorials to them. The same with the civilians who are killed in Tanga in the war. Nobody bothers to count their bodies either. So in the context of the Black Lives Matter movement, clearly those lives did not matter, seems to be what Gerner is saying to us. And it struck me reading the novel that I spent a lot of time at school, or it feels like a lot of time at school, studying the First World War, but we never heard about the battlefields beyond France. So in our history syllabus, those lives didn't matter either. So my question is, do you think the world is getting better at hearing a more diverse range of voices, or is there still too much domination from one type of narrative voice? And this might be a separate question, but how do you think translating fits into that picture of expanding the voices that get heard?
Wow, thank you very much. So my daughter is doing her A-levels in history. She's doing history, English, and economics. And the only African history that she covers is South African history. And it's very much apartheid, nothing else. She doesn't do anything else there. But that said, I think, yes, I mean, there's definitely things are changing. So, I mean, if you go, for example, on Channel 4, was it last year, David Lammy, who is an MP for Tottenham, had a program called The Unremembered, Britain's Forgotten War Heroes. And in that program, he reveals that there were more than 100,000 Africans who died fighting for Britain during World War I, and they were not honored. There's no individual grave or sort of like anything, there's no memory of them. But the fact that he was able to go and uncover this, I think, means that there are voices now that are speaking for what was probably forgotten for a very, very long time. And I was quite lucky in that I translated his findings into Swahili for the Commonwealth. And it was really striking to read things like some officers, for example, in Ghana, writing that, well, there's no need to bury them. These people don't value the dead. So there's no point in spending our money on this kind of thing. But yeah, so there's always a positive and a negative, if that makes sense. So, but then translating Gurna. So where I come from, Tanzania, we speak Swahili. You can probably hear from the way I speak, I have an accent. So English is my third language. And so this means that people read Swahili, they go to school, they study in Swahili. And so what Gurna writes doesn't really get to them. They don't hear it, they have no idea. And the majority, that is, there is the elite that reads and sort of like knows and etc. But it's a very small percentage. And so I thought translating this into Swahili would include a voice that is probably in the margins here, sort of like to bring it back, where it's like bringing it home, if that makes sense. And that's why I wanted to translate him. And now that he's won the Nobel, I think, thinking of the voices, it's probably going to be even louder, I hope anyway. So I don't know if I've answered your question or not, but I think that's what I would say, yeah.
Thank you. And picking up on Paula's point about how the story of Paul has been mediated through so many different voices, what was that like for you as a translator? I know in Afterlives there are bits of Swahili, bits of German, bits of English, and of course you're conscious of the nuance of every word. What was it like translating the work?
So, so I didn't do Afterlives, I've done Paradise, and it's very similar. You also have a lot of Swahili, it's in English, but the English that Gurna uses, I think, asks for whoever is reading to imagine a very different world. So sometimes some people say when you're reading Gurna, it's like you're reading a translation already. I don't know if it's a translation or if it's like you have to imagine, which makes you translate. But for me, I really wanted to keep it as it is. I believe, I mean, when you're translating, we have these two strategies, like you either familiarize, you make something more domestic. So when somebody reads, they don't recognize that it's a translation, or they think this is an original, or you make it foreign. And I thought I would do exactly what he did. So the story is in Swahili. What was Swahili, I've kept as Swahili. But what was German, Arabic, Hindi, I've kept as it is, so that, because the world he's writing about as well, East Africa, is very different from most parts of Africa, especially the coast. The coast is very cosmopolitan. You have Arabs and Indians and whites and sort of like living in a very small space. And so you have to translate day to day. So yes, I mean, I don't know if that makes sense, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you. And of course, Afterlives touches on the themes of colonialism, the invasion and occupation by first the Germans and then the British. Yeah. Actually, it's not as simple as that. It's not, no pun intended, it's not a black and white exposition of colonialism. And we at Five Talents, of course, are very aware of the long shadows of colonialism through our work. But what Gurna seems to be saying is that it's not a simple picture. So could you perhaps share a little bit more with us about how you see it and what Afterlives tells us about how the abuse of power can happen within and between different groups, between different genders, between different socioeconomic statuses, ages, and so on and so on?
Yeah, so I'll tell you what, I think sort of like often when we talk about the history of parts of the world, such as Africa, we always center colonialism. It's always very central in that, for example, the periods are demarcated with prefixes that center colonialism. So for example, when you talk about East African history, you talk about the pre-colonial, the colonial, the post-colonial, and then now we're trying to decolonize. So it's always, the colonial is still always there. It's always centered in one way or another. And we somehow, it seems we can't get away from it. But having a voice, I think I'm probably repeating myself again, having a voice of somebody like Gurna who lived, I mean, he was born in 1948 when Zanzibar was under the British colonial sort of like system. So he's lived through the colonial system. And then he moved here when he was 18. So this is somebody who saw it from within. And then now he's writing back. He's writing through his experiences as somebody who's lived the whole thing. I think this is very, very central. Just sort of like, so Afterlives, the book sort of like places, I mean, colonial empires at the background So for example, you have the British and the Germans, they're there, but they're very much sort of like behind the scenes. Central to the story are people like Hamza and Khalifa, who are the Africans, the sort of like the Indian, the Arabs, so the Swahili people. So I think this is one way where Gurna sort of like shifts or like sort of shows us a different way of looking at colonialism. So it's not the colonial master who is speaking, but rather the subject, if that makes sense. And also he shows that East Africa was very cosmopolitan, because I mean, even before the arrival of Western powers, you had all these, you had trade. This is a mercantile sort of like society that is there. And then speaking of black and white, you know, it might be a bit controversial, but when we talk of things like, for example, slavery, we often say, oh, the foreigners came and brought slavery. But what Gurna is showing is that slavery was there. It was not an economic system as it became, with people being sent to, I don't know, India and the Arab world from East Africa, but it was there where sort of, I think he writes, especially in Paradise, people were very happy to sell off their cousins they did not like. So, I mean, it was there, it was in a different form, but it was there. And so he shows that it wasn't black and white, as in they came and we were innocent. His depiction is not naive, if that makes sense. We could probably explore this later if anybody wants to pick it up.
I'm sure there will be many more questions on that, and it will be great to hear Paula's perspective as well, because of course slavery and the different power differentials between different groups comes up a lot in Phoebe as well. Let me ask you one more question, Ida, and then I want us to move on to Emmanuel to hear from him as well. But what I found when reading Afterlives is that there is a lot of violence in the novel, some of it perhaps motivated by fear. I'm thinking of Afia's uncle, or the Feldfebel, the German officer who is very, very violent, but some of it seemingly senseless cruelty. But to counterbalance that, there's also a lot of examples of redemptive behaviour, of people giving without needing any return. And I'd love you to reflect a bit on the title. When I was reading it, I wondered if Afterlives refers to the rebuilding of lives after trauma, a bit like Phoebe in Paula's book, rebuilding her life, and what many Five Talents members do. But I also wondered if the title Afterlives does give us hints of the shadows, the far-reaching shadows that always permeate when you have experienced trauma, colonialism, and many other things.
Definitely.
What do you think of the title? And secondly, would you describe the book as redemptive despite the shadows and the cruelty?
Yeah, I think you probably answered the question as in what you said. So from my interpretation of Afterlives, it's like this is the afterlife of Hamza, who is Yusuf in Paradise, and Hamza in Paradise then is the boy who was sold into slavery. His father pawned him. He pawned him because he owed money to a merchant, and the merchant in Paradise is called Uncle Aziz, but in Afterlives he's called Amur Biashara. So he is sold to this person. He suffers. He goes through these caravan routes, and his life is terrible. At the end of Paradise, he sees dogs eating shit. Sorry for my language, as in feces, and they look at him and they try to hide the feces because they think he'll come and take it. And right then he realizes that the dogs, in his words, have recognized a shit eater. And so he runs towards the Germans because he's thinking maybe they're better. And so in Afterlives, you see him that actually, no, it wasn't better. He's in hospital. He goes through so much trauma. But at the same time, he then meets Afia, and you have this beautiful tenderness. Like the love scenes that they have, I really love them so much. And so at the end, there is hope. Yes, there is definite hope. And later their son travels to Germany, etc. You have the post-colonial period where there's hope, and hopefully things will be better, although in reality they never are. But yeah, so there's definitely hope. Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. I must read Paradise. I hadn't actually realized Lives was the afterlife of Hansa. I shall very much look forward to reading that. But again, what I think it speaks to is the fact that stories don't just start and finish. There is always a backstory. There's always a future. In Five Talents, a privilege to be part of seeing a small part of someone's story as they build their savings and start their businesses and so on. But we have to remember that there is always a history that someone is coming from and a future that they're going on to. Which is a good segue to our third author, Emmanuel, who has written an essay in the collection Tomorrow is Too Late, which is a collection of essays by young climate activists. And Emmanuel, I would love to ask you about your description of yourself as an agent of change. When I read that in your essay, of course, I immediately thought of Phoebe having agency or control over her own story. But then I got to thinking, is it fair to burden young people with solving the problem of climate change, with making them have to use their agency to solve it when they did not cause it? And of course, many members of Five Talent savings groups are young people, and they are affected every day by climate change, by flooding, by drought, by diminishing harvests, but they are not causing it. Their carbon emissions are tiny, and it's, broadly speaking, the older people from the more economically rich countries who are causing it. So I want to ask you, why should youth have to solve the challenge of climate change?
Okay, thank you very much for this question. First of all, as you see, the world is suffering from climate crisis, and also in Burundi, we are suffering from climate change impacts happening there in Burundi. So as a young and also a young generation, we must make hope. We must give hope to young generation, to future generation regarding to this happening and destroying our planet. So that's why I must work hardly and make positive impact in my community. Greening Burundi have been initiated by me when I see how Burundian people are suffering from. For example, Burundian people are meeting some problem, climate impacts like floods, deforestation, and also more than 80% of Burundian people live thanks to agriculture. There is a huge deforestation in Burundi. When Burundian people cultivate, they don't get enough agricultural production. And also that increased poverty, malnutrition related disease increased. And also when nothing is done, Burundian people will suffer. So that's why after seeing what's going on, what's happening within community, I was very sad to see what's going on and tried to make a change and seek sustainable solutions throughout Greening Burundi's initiatives. So we launched the Greening Burundi's initiatives in order to help Burundi, which is suffering from climate crisis happening there. I would like to let you know that, for example, in 2020, there was floods and more than 200,000 Burundian people displaced because of those issues of floods. So when nothing is done, Burundi people will continue to suffer from the climate change impact. So I launched 3 main programs via Greening Burundi. The main program is to make Burundi green again. So because in last 25 years ago, Burundi lost more than 50% of its forest cover. So that's why we see deforestation, we see soil erosion, we see floods, because when the rain coming, the floods go directly into houses and destroy everything. So that's why throughout Greening Burundi, we are trying to make a change. We are giving hope to future generation and making sustainable solutions.
Thank you, Emmanuel. And I'm conscious that those 200,000 people you mentioned who were victims of flooding, there was probably very little coverage of that in our media here in the UK. So once again, I'm reminded of those lines, nobody bothered to count. And I want to ask you, we've spoken a little bit already about voices being unheard or not listened to, and people being uncounted, people not being seen. And in climate change, we know that often our partners, the members of our savings groups, in discussions about climate change, their voices are not heard either. So how does that feel to you as a climate activist from Burundi? I wonder if you could share some examples for us of when your voice has been heard and when it has not.
As climate activist from Burundi, I feel aware and I see what I'm doing for the moment is important to community and my country because I see some improvement, some results regarding to the work I have already achieved 5 years ago. So, and also as we plant trees, as we reforest the deforested areas, so planting trees is not enough. Community are in lack of information about how they can protect environment and take adequate measures that preserve our planet. So my voice is being heard, but sometimes our readers don't hear our voices because they even not support our ongoing initiatives. So this question of climate crisis must be taken by everyone, must be supported by everyone, because me and you, if we take initiatives in protecting environment, we save we save millions and millions of people, and we save future of everyone. So there are some barriers during these ongoing activities, but we would like to invite everyone to take adequate measures and save environment.
So I guess what you're saying there in a way is that we all have agency and we are all able to take action on climate change. And we're also incredibly grateful to you, Emmanuel, and for all the work that you're doing to raise the profile globally as well as within Burundi, and to take positive action through your tree planting and your other initiatives. And all those measures give us hope. They do give us hope that the afterlives are not going to be disasters, that we are going to be able to replant trees and to see new growth and to perhaps even reverse some of the impacts of climate change. What I want to ask you finally is the same question I asked Ida. I asked her whether she thinks Afterlives is a redemptive or a hopeful book. So I want to ask the same of you about Tomorrow is Too Late. And whenever I speak of hope, I'm reminded of a member of one of the 5 Talent savings groups who said, savings shows we believe in tomorrow. It shows we have hope, because if you don't believe in tomorrow, if you don't have hope, there is no point saving. So given your writing in the collection Tomorrow is Too Late, do you have hope for the future, and what gives you hope for the future, if so?
Thank you very much. Tomorrow is too late, and tomorrow begins today. There is a hope, because throughout our initiatives, for example, Greening Burundi started to work with young people, young students, young people in different schools throughout initiatives of making awareness, giving education, focusing on environment. So when you prepare young people, you prepare the future, because they are core pillar of future. So that's why there is a hope. If we see how young people are motivated and convinced to make a change, and also this gives also the strength to the leaders to take measures to put into action climate activities. So, and also when I see how young people are raising voice abroad, are manifesting, are contesting against how people are, or leaders are destroying the planet, this gives me a hope that the future reserves the better things for us and for next generation. So I'm very motivated, convinced to see the futures better, and also the planet which is very very protected because we are entering in bad conditions. We see how global warming is rising, so that's why we want to see that the solution is already taken for everyone. I have hope that the future will be good for our planet and everyone will be motivated and convinced to take adequate measures and protect environment.
Great, thank you so much, Emmanuel, Ida, and Paula. Sadly, Paula has had to slip away. She has another function to go to tonight. If you do have questions specifically for her, please do still put them in the chat box and we will pass them on to her. But it's time now to open up for your questions. So please feel free to keep typing your questions in the chat box. I'm going to start with a couple that we've had already. And the first one is for Ida to ask, can you tell us about some of the other works that you've translated?
Yes, so I have also translated Alice in Wonderland into Swahili. And because I just love the book so much from when I was little. And I've also done other academic work like poetry, what's this, poems for the penniless and things like that. Yeah, but I think what would stand out to you would be Alice in Wonderland into Swahili.
I have studied a bit of Swahili, but I think it might be a test for me to try and read Alice in Wonderland in Swahili, but I will have a go.
I had so much trouble with the puns.
Yes, goodness.
It was in the end, I just sort of like had to have our own from East Africa because it was just, oh my God, it was very hard.
Goodness.
Yeah.
I can only begin to imagine. Thank you, Ida. We have another question here from Pete. Pete, would you like to unmute and ask the question yourself, or would you prefer me to read it out for you? I think we can make this a bit more participatory if people would like, and have you ask your questions and with voices as you might in a real book club.
We've heard about the greening of Burundi, which is great. And I just wanted to know, from a wider perspective, is that an extension of or similar to, there's a multi-million-pound project greening the Sahara. I know that Burundi's not in the Sahara, but I just wonder if it's connected with that project, mirroring some of the practices and what the similarities or differences were.
That's one for you, I think, Emmanuel.
I've understood the questions, but it's not so good. So, but Burundi is located in East Africa. Yeah. And also bordered by Tanzania, Rwanda, and also Democratic Republic of Congo. As I said, Burundi suffered from deforestation, and also more than 50% of its forest cover has been lost in 25 years ago. So after seeing those issues, because when there is deforestation, there is soil erosion, there is global warming, Burundian people live thanks to agriculture. So above 80% of Burundian people are farmers. So we live thanks to agriculture. And also when there is soil erosion, there is the lack of soil fertility. People don't get enough agricultural production. And malnutrition-related disease increased, and also poverty, because agriculture is the main activity that people use to live daily. So throughout greening Burundi, we've seen that is a major issue to the community that we must seek is sustainable solutions. So we've launched the intensive reforesting activities to reforest the deforested areas, protect the existing forests, and also because of Burundian people are farmers, we've launched multiplying agroforestry trees that cohabit with cultures, and those trees don't cause any problem, and also they cohabit with cultures. And we've seen there is a result. And also we are seeing how people now are motivated. So, and also planting trees is not enough. We've because we humans are the first who are destroying this planet, who are destroying those trees, cutting those trees without to replace them because of lack of information, because Burundian people don't have enough information about nature protection or forest protection. So we've launched some educational program to instill in them the information regarding to protection the ecosystems. So we've launched the two main programs in schools and also universities, and also in the community, which called Green First Day. We get the people within community to talk more about environment, to share ideas. This is a way of motivating them in order to try to know what they can do and take care of our dear planet. So that's how we are trying to involve as Greening Burundi's initiatives there in Burundi. To date, more than 2 million trees have been planted by Greening Burundi at Burundi national territory.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Emmanuel. I just want to say one thing actually about, well, first of all, thank you for your contribution to the collection of essays, but also thank you to you and to your young activist colleagues for your sheer energy and your unwillingness to take no for an answer. The very title, Tomorrow's Too Late, I mean, that indicates to us the urgency of all these things. But the thought I had also in reading your essay, and quite a few others from other parts of the world too, is the complete dependence of local communities in remote areas on agriculture, and the disproportionate effect, if you like, that climate change has, in the sense that for livelihoods, there's no readily available plan B. Because in an urban context, it is possible, perhaps slightly more easily, to change orientation or occupation. But what if you're in a remote location, rural, heavily dependent on agriculture, like you said, 85% of the people are, then the plan B option is very limited. So, thank you for all that you're doing to increase awareness, but also to improve techniques and to enable people to have more sustainable livelihoods. But it's just that challenge that, particularly in rural areas, it's very difficult to move on to something else.
Yeah, thank you very much.
That links to another question we've had, John, which is asking Emmanuel whether there's an educational component to what you do. Are you helping to spread the message about deforestation, about the importance of tree planting, even about alternative livelihoods, as John is suggesting?
Yeah, regarding to what we are doing, so first of all, as I told you, it is initiative I launched because I've seen how Burundian people are suffering. So and also it is a project which was very difficult for me to start, because people didn't understand well about protecting environment and also about the importance of trees there in Burundi. So because they cut, they don't replace them. So because of Burundian people use wood, they use wood in their daily life. They cut trees for cooking, so for doing for their daily life. So what I thought is to make biodegradable charcoal from waste, because we've organized throughout Greening Burundi some cleanup and collect the waste and do waste management and made biochar. So this is a way of reducing how people use the wood and how they cut trees. This will help Greening Burundi to grow where the trees which are being planted. And also because of Burundi, every people, they cut trees, they cultivate. So we've launched other programs, which is kitchen gardening, to give community education how they can build kitchen gardening. It's a system of permaculture this is also a way in which is helping Greening Burundi's initiatives to keep on going and to achieve our goal.
Thank you, Emmanuel. And continuing the theme of education, if you like, we have another question for Ida, which is around the importance of literacy, of being able to read and write in Afterlives. It also comes up in Phoebe, of course, where there's great prominence given to the role of the scribe. But it's been noted that in Afterlives, Afia is only able to escape from the abusive relationship. She's living in the home of her uncle, who is violent to her. She's only able to escape from that because she learns how to read and write. And of course, Hamza only gets his job because he can read and write as well. So could you say a little bit more? It's very relevant to Five Talents, where we have a literacy and numeracy component in our work. Could you say a little bit more about the importance that Gunnar is placing on reading and writing?
So, okay, Swahili is actually among the few sort of like languages that have a very strong, a very historic, like it's written from around the 16th, 15th century. And we have the manuscripts that have been preserved from then, and some of them are translations. If any of you are interested at SOAS, we have them, we digitize them, so you can access them online to have a look. But these are written using the Arabic script. Now, the Arabic has 3 vowels, but Swahili has 5 vowels. And so writing Swahili using Latin is actually better, because sort of like you have the 5 vowels, A, E, I, O, U. And so in 1930s, from 1920s, 30s, you have the introduction now of this Latin script through British missionaries and German missionaries. And it was only the boys that went to school, and the girls are not allowed. I think this is something, it's a phenomenon that you have all over the world, where women are seen to be better in the kitchen. And so when they learn to read and write, it becomes a problem. And so, I mean, what he writes is definitely the truth. So Afia is allowed to learn the Quran, to read the Quran, but not Latin, because that will sort of like open a very different Western world, which should be sort of like, she shouldn't have access to. But now, so a few years since colonialism, independence, etc., we still have this problem in East Africa where reading is a huge problem. And we say that reading is a luxury. So people would buy, for instance, textbooks that would allow them to go through school, but they would not be buying books because it's a luxury. Like, do I buy my rice or do I buy a book? The choice is obvious. And so this is something that is a big problem, I think, in most of African countries. And it's something that Gunnar really sort of like shows very well. I don't know if I've answered your question, but yes, that's it.
Absolutely, thank you.
Thank you.
A couple more questions lined up in the chat box, but I also want to encourage all of you to just put your hand up, and then we'll ask you to unmute and speak with your own voice. We've spoken a lot about the importance of listening and hearing unheard voices, so I don't want to be the one reading out all your questions. So do please wave at me if you'd like to ask your own question. Joe, I think I can see you've unmuted. Yes, please go ahead.
Hi there. I would love to know more about the challenges of translating and interpreting generally, but translating into Kiswahili. How do you manage to maintain the sense of what you're translating? What are the biggest challenges, particularly translating to speak?
I think, you know, like, okay, for me, I teach translation. And so I think the first thing I do is you have to sort of like imagine who your audience is. So it's probably probably my imaginary audience will not read me, but you have to imagine who you are writing for. I mean, who is probably going to read you, and then you are writing to them, you're translating for them. So the language choices, you'll be targeting them. But then I think when you're translating, you have to really accept that there will be loss and there will be gain. There will be so many things that you're going to lose. Like, for example, in terms of Alice, the puns were not going to come across. I had to accept that. I had to find something else. But then there will be gain. I mean, there will be sort of like, especially with Gurna, because he's writing about East Africa. So sort of like the audience that would read his work in Swahili will get it right away. When you check, for instance, sort of like the reviews on Goodreads about Gurna, it's very much, oh my God, it's so dense. How does one get this? But in Swahili, it makes absolute sense. It's perfect because it's come back home, if that makes sense. So I think with that in mind, like, this is my audience. I'm going to have loss, I'm going to have gain, and there'll be instances that I have to paraphrase. I won't always find that equivalent, but I'll bring that sense across. So with these kind of techniques, I do it.
That's wonderful to hear. Thank you. I'm so interested in how languages work and how languages work together.
And with cultures, it's very different. I mean, there are all these cultures that you have to. So something, for example, Guna likes to, like to tease sometimes. His language is not the cleanest, and Swahili, like you can't say even things like I don't know, like the back of your body. It's like people will be like, oh! So you have to be aware that you cannot write that. So you have to find another way of, like, I don't know, body part to sit upon, like that kind of stuff.
That's so interesting. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
We have one more question for Ida and one more for Emmanuel, but we might have time for one more after that. So do please raise your hand via Zoom or in with your actual body if you would like to ask another question. Let's go to Ida first. There's a question about the importance of sibling relationships in the book. So there is both Afia and Ilyas, but there is also the relationship between, and I can't remember his name, the German Oberlieutenant and the brother with the Schiller book. Can you say a little bit more about the importance of those sibling relationships?
So, I mean, I'll probably go back again to culture. So in East Africa, especially along the coast, it's very common to have families where you share a father and they're probably like 4 or 5, four mothers. And often even your mothers might be married to the same man at the same time. So we even have words such as ndugu, which literally means like, this is like a relative. It could be a sibling, but it could also be somebody very close, almost like a sibling. So I'm not sure what they wanted to find out about siblings, but it's important. It's very much blood is thicker than water. Like, you have to come through for your family all the time. It's like, no matter what they do, you have to forget and be there. I don't know what they wanted to know about the siblings. Was there anything in particular about siblings?
I think why the relationship is so important. So I think you've answered that.
Okay, yeah. I think that will be it then. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Emmanuel, I noticed in the introduction to your essay, Grace refers to you as brother and sister. I believe she calls herself the big sister, which is part of that sibling relationship as well. But we have a question for you finally around the global dynamics really of climate change. So somebody is asking, how do we make sure that the importance of those who are suffering the impacts of climate change, like people living in Burundi, how do we make sure that their voice is heard at the international levels in the global forum? Do you think enough weight is being given to their voices in those global discussions at the level of the UN and the other climate bodies that we have?
Okay. Thank you very much. What I can say is that our voice must be heard, because even everyone is seeing what's happening abroad all over the world. All countries are suffering from climate crisis impact, such as global warming. You see how temperature is being raised. So we need to be active. We need to join hands and take solutions. I've got many time to speak loudly during different conferences, such as in Burundi, in Germany, in other countries, Egypt, and also in Maldives, raising voice, inviting people to take care and save our planet, save our nature. So me and you must start, because the change starts from you. If we start taking care where we are, we change others' mentality, because we must change mentality. We must see that if we take care from today, this planet will prepare our better future for our future generations. So I invite everyone to take care to make a positive impact and support ongoing initiatives, because we are seeing, like in Burundi, where I'm implementing Greening Burundi's initiatives, our projects are not supported by our local authorities, but we keep hope. We see how people are being motivated and they are helping us even in our daily tree planting initiatives and also our educational program. So governments must heed our voice, must put into action some decision made in different United Nations climate conferences. As there is a climate, NIRASTA climate conference, United Nations climate conference held in the UK, there are some measures taken, but when you see, if they put into action them, so you can find some results. So that's why let's, from today, join action, not stay every time gathering people saying without make their decisions into action. So I invite everyone to take care to support such initiatives. So if you wish to support Greening Burundi's initiatives, you can visit greeningburundi.org and they will see how you can support Greening Burundi's initiatives. So, and also to support financially or monetary or as human resources is not enough. So you have to start supporting yourself. So starting inside you, protect environment, because there are some little bit gesture that you can do and that can help to support protecting this planet we are living in. So I invite everyone to take care and to consider our voice as a key of protecting and saving our future. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Emmanuel. And that is, I think, the perfect way for us to just draw our discussions to a close today. You've reminded us that we all have agency, as we've heard throughout the three readings that we've all read. We all have agency, and that's very much something that Five Talents sees time and again through the Savings Groups members that we work with, and that even people who have no voice, of course they do have a voice. It's not that they have no voice, it's that it hasn't been listened to, it hasn't been heard. That's something that all of our three speakers have touched on tonight. Our role as Five Talents is to enable people to unlock their talents, to discover their voices, to discover their agency, and to change their own future, so that tomorrow is not too late. So thank you very much to all of you who've come along tonight. Please do heed Emmanuel's call to use your agency to make a difference. If you'd like to support Greening Burundi, please do look up their website. Please do, if you're new to Five Talents, also look up the Five Talents website, fivetalents.org.uk, and find out more about how to support our work. And please do also try and read either Paradise or Alice in Wonderland in Kiswahili. I think that should be the next challenge for all of us. All that remains is for me to thank you all ever so much, and particularly to thank our speakers, Ida, Emmanuel and Paula, for joining us tonight and for all that they've shared. Goodbye, thank you.